So before we get into the business of retrieving data from our API, I just want to go through some extensions that I normally like to use when developing an Angular application. So we've already got some C# extensions and they're useful for .NET Core and C#. But the ones we'll add now, or the ones that I'm going to show adding now, I find incredibly useful when we're developing an Angular application. So I certainly recommend installing these or equivalents if you have an alternative preference already. So the first one that I'll install is some Angular snippets, because the code that we write in Angular can be sometimes a little bit painful to type out due to number of brackets and square brackets and curly brackets. It can be helpful for the commonly used commands that we use or Angular features that we use to get a bit of help with this, and these snippets certainly help us do this. Now the ones that I use in this course are these Angular snippets by John Papa, and what I'd normally suggest is just go for the extension that's the most popular, but there is one that's slightly popular than this that I haven't actually looked at, which has got something like 10 million downloads, and the one that I use has got a mere 6 million downloads. But this one's really good, and this is the one that I will use and install for this particular course. What we'll also use, which will speed up our workflow, is something called Angular Files, and this allows us to right-click and create components from the Solution Explorer. And whilst it says quickly scaffold Angular 2 file templates in here, it still works perfectly fine with Angular 8. So I'm also going to install this one. Another extension that we need is the Angular Language Service. And this provides a kind of similar service to the C# service that we used. It gives us go to definition, and it also gives us IntelliSense inside our HTML templates as well. So this is pretty useful. Although its rating is going down, so that does suggest there are a few issues with it, but it's still more useful than not having it. Another extension that we'll use is Auto Rename Tag. This is still provided as an extension. The VS Code itself doesn't have this functionality to auto rename a closing tag as we update the opening tag. And this is just a nice little utility that does that functionality for us. The kind of thing that you would get automatically in Visual Studio, we do need to install an extension for in VS Code. Another one that I use is incredibly useful. It's called Bracket Pair Colorizer, and there's two versions of this. So let's just grab the latest one, Bracket Pair Colorizer 2, and all this does is simply gives opening and closing brackets a unique color, and it really helps us identify where the opening and closing bracket for a particular method is. As our methods get longer and we add more nesting inside them, then it's very useful to be able to see very quickly and easily where it starts and where it finishes. And this provides us with that functionality. What we'll also add is a debugger for Chrome. And this one allows us to debug our JavaScript code from Chrome inside VS Code. Now there's plenty of options for debugging JavaScript, and we can debug directly inside Chrome Developer Tools, but sometimes it's useful to come back into our editor so that we can see what's happening inside there. And this provides that functionality, so we'll also install this one. Another one I like to use is the Material UI theme, and this provides no functionality at all, but it does make things more aesthetically pleasing inside our editor. So I'm also going to install this as well, and select the Material Icon theme from the command palette up here as well. Another extension that's pretty useful is Prettier, and this is just a code formatter that allows us to use our VS Code shortcut keys to quickly and easily format our JavaScript or TypeScript or CSS code. So I'm also going to install this one as well. And just a couple more to go. We'll also install TSLint, and this will give us some highlighting inside our code editor when we're not abiding by our TSLint rules that we get given by Angular when we created our project. So we'll also install this one as well. And it's just helpful to be notified when we're doing something wrong inside our code editor as well. And one last one to finish off, and the name can be quite off-putting of this one, but it's called Angular 2 Switcher, and we're on Angular 8. And this sounds like a terrible thing to put in here, but this is just a very, very simple little utility that allows us to switch between our Angular component template files, the HTML, the component itself, the TypeScript file, and the CSS file by using keyboard shortcuts. And they take a little while to get used to. And all it means is that when you want to switch to either the .ts, the .html, or the .css, then you just used Shift Alt and O if you're on a Mac, or you use Alt and O if you're on Windows. And it might take you a little while to get used to using them, but once you do, it's so much quicker than going to the File Explorer to go and get the files, or using the find file with Command and P to go and find the name of the file you're looking for. Once you're in a component and you need to adjust the HTML, it's really good just to use the little shortcut keys to go backwards and forwards between these different files. Now, if you look at your keyboard and you see a U, an I, and an O in the top right hand of your keyboard, then it's just going to be a case of pressing Shift Alt or just Alt and U, I, or O to switch in between the components. And it's something that once you get used to using it, it really does speed up your workflow in Angular. So I'm just going to install this one as well, even though it's called Angular 2 Switcher. But it works perfectly well in Angular version 8. So these are all the extensions we need, and what we'll take a look at next is actually bringing the data back down from our server. And we'll take a look at that next.